Hello and welcome everyone to this month's Book of the Month discussion with Kristy, Woodson, Harvey. We are so thrilled to have her back again in the Lowcountry Book Club. And in case anyone has stumbled into this interview and does not know, when we discuss the book with the author, we take for granted that you've read the book. So there may be spoilers here. If you haven't read the book yet, come back and watch this interview later so that we don't spoil it for you. Just press pause and come back and talk to us later. So anyway, we're thrilled to have Kristy as always. And for a brief introduction, if anyone again stumbled in and doesn't know, Kristy Woodson Harvey is the New York Times, USA Today, and Publishers Weekly best-selling author of 10 novels, including Under the Southern Sky, the Peachtree Bluff series, The Wedding Veil, and The Summer of Songbirds, her latest, which is, of course, our Book of the Month club, her Book of the Month for the club. I'm not starting over. I'm going to mess up today. I'm just telling y'all. It's going to be one of those days. Her books have received numerous accolades, including Southern Living's most anticipated beach reads, Entertainment Weekly's spring reading picks, and Katie Couric's most anticipated reads. I am just so impressed. No, seriously, I think this may be my favorite book of yours so far. And I've been trying to analyze why, because, that's the way my brain works. Some of these characters seem to have a darker past than perhaps some of your others. I think there's a difference between having characters who've had bad luck and troubles, and those who've made bad choices in the past, which, let's face it, if you're human, if you're breathing, you have made bad choices at some point. So all of us have. But it was different. I think. Would you agree with that? And is this something you did intentionally?
Well, first of all, thank you, Susan, for having me. I love your book club. Your readers are the best. So thank you, everyone out there. And I'm so excited to talk to you today. And I love a book club with spoilers. It's like my favorite. So I'm very excited. It's funny that you say that because I hadn't really considered that so much, but I think you're right. They definitely, these are definitely some characters that make some bad choices, which I think that I've touched on before, maybe in like Peachtree Bluff. But now that you say it, yeah, that they definitely have made some bad choices. And I think I like writing characters who make bad choices because
It's real.
We
It's
all
real.
do. Yeah, and it makes me laugh because not often, but every now and then, I'll get something for someone like, oh, I just can't believe that, she would do such and such. And I'm like, really? Because I think in real life, that's like the most natural reaction to that.
Yeah.
Like maybe not in sunny women's fiction land, but in real
Right.
life, when your
Yeah.
best friend dates your brother, you're not happy.
Oh yeah, we're going to get to Lanier. I've got some opinions about Lanier, but even with Daphne, which I thought you did such a great job with all of these characters, but Daphne, of course, is my favorite, and I'm getting ahead of
Thank
myself
you.
a little bit. So, of course, I read the acknowledgement section because I study those, which told us a bit about the inspiration for this book. So, you went to Camp Hollymount in North Carolina in the North Carolina mountains growing up. How much of that experience did you draw on for the Summer of Songbirds? And is Camp Holly Springs more Camp Hollymont or more Camp Seafarer?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So setting wise, I feel like Camp Holly Springs is much more Camp Seafarer. But I didn't want to kind of like pigeonhole myself into, well, and obviously I wasn't going to write about the real Camp Seafarer because it's not closing down and it doesn't need to be saved. So that would have been weird. But I got inspired to write this book while I was at family camp with my son and my husband and some friends. And so, that seemed like setting wise where I wanted to set it. And it's a little, it's more coastal. It works better if you want to have like a coastal setting for the book. But there is a lot of Camp Hollymont in here, especially, okay, so this is funny. This is how like our subconscious works, I think. I had totally forgotten that at Camp Hollymont, all of our cabins were named after birds, like the blue jays or the hummingbirds or the, whatever it may be. And so when I was writing this book, I just had like a vague idea for it. And normally the title comes later for me, but for this one, I just had this like burst of like, it's going to be called The Summer of Songbirds. Like I just knew that title. I loved it. And then later when I went back and was like going through old camp stuff, I was like, oh my gosh, all of the cabins were named after birds. So that made a lot of sense that, that kind of snuck in there. But, a lot of the activities were based on Camp Polymont, except the sailing, because it was in the mountains. So there was not sailing there, and that was definitely Camp Seafarer. But even little things like I was going through old pictures and called a camp friend of mine. I was like, we're wearing these t-shirts and they say MOP on them. And I remember making them. I remember it being a big deal. I remember us like laughing and having such a good time making these t-shirts, but I cannot remember what MOP meant. And she was like, oh, well, we were the makeout patrol at the camp dance. So just like little things like that, I think factored in. And then of course, just these friendships that you make that I think are kind of special and extraordinary in their own way, because it is the first time in your life for a lot of people where you have this level of freedom and you're making your own relationships instead of a friend you meet at school or a friend your mom is friends with, or whatever. It really is kind of like you're meeting people from different places and kind of forming this bond that you have that you don't really get with other people.
Right. So inquiring minds want to know what your favorite camp activity is.
Oh, my favorite camp activity. That's such a good question. So I am a big zip line fan. I love a zip line. I think it's so fun. But I'm trying to think of my favorite. I hadn't thought about this in a while, but I think when I was a camper, I loved tennis. I've always been a tennis player, and I always loved tennis. And I really loved tennis because of the super cute tennis instructor who was the brother of the director of the camp. Oh, he was so cute. So that's a theme definitely in this book. But I loved archery, which is like something that I never did at home. So
interesting. Archery. Okay. I can just see you, pulling the bow and Okay.
I'm still pretty good, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
A hidden talent.
Not as good as my
son.
And
you heard it here first, ladies.
That's right.
That Kristy's good at archery. Okay. So the story that you related in the acknowledgement section about the inspiration for this book and family camp and how this came to be, in case anyone missed it, because I read this stuff but not everyone does, would you care to share a bit about that, about the family camp and that whole thing?
Oh yes, absolutely. So I started this book in summer of 2020, which is hard to believe because that was like a long time ago. So I don't know how much of it I was actually writing, but I definitely was like getting the idea for it and starting just a little bit. And so, of course, my son's summer camp had been canceled because it was the middle of a pandemic. It was 3 months into a pandemic. And, really and truly, 20 boys in a cabin with no showers for 2 weeks is probably like never hygienic, but certainly not. I mean, they're supposed to shower, obviously, but come on, like they don't. They're not going to. So, his camp was canceled for obvious reasons, and they gave us the opportunity to go to family camp instead, which I thought was a really ingenious idea and inspired this book in a lot of ways, because it hadn't really occurred to me that like summer camps were really going to struggle, and a lot of them closed, in the wake of COVID. They couldn't keep their doors open.
Right.
And so that was something that they did that I thought was kind of unique and interesting. It was sort of a fundraiser, like, can we keep your tuition and you come to family camp instead? And so we did. We thought that was a really fun idea. And so we went with a couple of families that we knew. And one of my best friends is an expert sailor. She started a sailing program in Beaufort where we live, and she went through Camp Seafarer, and like everyone knows her there because she was like such a great sailor. And so we go down on the first day. It's like just the three moms, and we go down to go sailing, and they're like, oh, we're out of radios, but Millie doesn't need a radio, obviously. Like, she's the best sailor here. Which, like, when you read that in a book, you're like, dun, dun, dun. But in real life, we didn't think anything about it. So we leave our cell phones on the dock because we're in this little tiny sailboat. We're going to get wet, and we start sailing, and about 30 minutes away from camp, the wind just dies, like absolutely dies. And so we're like messing with the sails and trying to get ourselves righted, and there's just nothing to do because there's no wind, and you can't control the wind. It doesn't matter how good of a sailor you are. So to pass the time, I'm like, you guys, I'm going to write this book about camp, and we start talking about our favorite summer camp memories. And Millie says, oh, I have to tell you this story about, I was 15 years old and I was by myself in a sailboat and it was a beautiful day. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this water spout comes across the water. And if you've never seen, so Susan Boyer has clearly knows what a water spout is, but a lot of people don't because you haven't ever seen one before. But it's basically a tornado on the water and it's really scary. It's like a big funnel cloud and it's just going zoop. And so the crazy thing is when you're in the water and that water spout is coming at you, obviously you're the tallest thing. I mean, your boat, no matter how little it is the tallest thing on that water. And so you have to abandon your boat, which to me it's like the scariest thing I can think of. So, she's a teenager, jumps out of the boat, and as luck would have it, the very handsome sailing instructor from the boys' camp sees this go down and comes out to rescue her. So the story going around camp was not, oh my gosh, Millie nearly died in the sailboat. It was, oh my gosh, Millie got to get rescued by the hot sailing instructor. And I was like, 100%, this is going in the book. So the scene where Daphne, Lanier, and Mary Stuart are in the sailboat and they're stranded is the very first scene that I wrote in this entire book when I got home. And kind of was the inspiration for the whole story, honestly. So yeah, that was really fun to write. And I think just kind of speaks to that, if you went to a summer camp, you probably had that guy that was like everyone's camp crush.
Right. Okay. So, I didn't go to that kind of summer camp. So I'm like trying to think, I mean, I can easily see this. I can see how this went down. And it's like, I want to go back and go to camp now. I mean, I went to camp, but there were different kinds of camps. There were very specific things for, anyway. Okay. So do you have lifelong friends that you met at camp like Daphne and Mary Stuart and Lanier?
I do. Well, actually, my college roommate was one of my friends from camp, which I think is kind of fun. And it was like the perfect thing because, we knew each other well because we went to camp together every summer, but we didn't have the same life, like in the normal, so we knew each other well enough that it was really fun to go be college roommates, but we weren't like best friends that knew everything about each other. So it was like same old, same old. So that was fun. But yeah, no, I definitely have friends that I still keep up with from camp, but I mean, no one's doing my hard things, unfortunately.
I love that. The hard things. I want someone to do my hard things.
I know.
I need somebody. If there's anyone out there who would like to volunteer to do my hard things, please get in touch with me. You know how to reach me.
Well, I have to tell you something so funny. So I launched this book. This was so fun. So we launched the book in Nantucket with Ellen Hildebrand. And she was interviewing me about the book. And she was like, I just really need someone to take my cardboard to the recycling. She's like, that would be my hard thing. I have all this recycling. And she's like, I just want someone to come by my house and be like, Ellen, I'm on my way to the recycling. Can I take your cardboard? I was like, seriously? That is your hard thing? I bet there are a lot of people on Nantucket that would be like, I have Ellen Hildebrand's cardboard right now, Like,
yeah, I'm thinking she could get that done really easy.
I think she could get that done pretty easily. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. My hard things are a lot harder than that.
Yeah. We're going for higher level things.
Right. Okay. So this novel seems to me to really have four sort of main characters: Daphne, Lanier, Mary Stuart, and June. How did you decide which of those characters would be your point of view characters?
Okay. So this was hard for me because not writing Mary Stuart as a POV character was difficult. But I had made a promise to myself. So Under the Southern Sky had 5 POVs. The Wedding Veil had 4 POVs. So when I sat down to write The Summer of Songbirds, I was like, I'm only having 2 POVs in this book. I'm only having 2. That's all I'm doing. So when I started out, I had Daphne and Lanier because I knew at the core of this story it was going to be, these 2 best friends. And, I don't know if I knew going in, like I knew we were going to save Camp Holly Springs. And I knew that one of my protagonists was going to be an attorney who finds out that her best friend's fiance has done something illegal and she has to decide whether to tell him. I knew those 2 things going in. I didn't know Huff. I didn't know about the brother thing. I didn't know about any of that. But as I was starting this story, I realized that in order to tell the story about how this camp was closing, if we didn't have Aunt June's perspective, it was a lot of like characters telling each other things that just I wasn't interested in. It just wasn't interesting. So I was like, okay, all right, we're going to have a third one and it's just going to be 3 and it's going to be okay. We're just going to have 3. But June actually was a character who I ended up paring down a lot. She had a longer POV. June had a love story in this book originally. Like, I feel like we need a sequel. I know.
Yeah, I vote for that.
I know, and I loved her love story, but my editor thought it was just too much going on. There's a lot going on in this book, so I sort of pared down some like kind of major things. Wait, there's something else that I took out that's like really spoilery, but I wanted you guys to know. Oh, it was that, so during that point when Huff and Daphne break up in the book, I actually had Stephen kind of like make this confession of love to her, and she thinks about it. She's like, this would be really great. Like, I can never be with Huff. I would have my family together, blah, blah, blah. And she doesn't like, she never, gets together with him. She lets him down easy, eventually, whatever. But so that was kind of something fun too that, didn't make it into the final book. That was not what you asked me, but I'm here.
No, this is super interesting, and I object to that being taken out. I think you need to like put that back in.
I know. It was good, right? Okay. Yeah. I'm glad to know. I should have gone with my gut on that one. But that part I really liked because I thought it was like a big complication for Daphne, and I love a big complication.
I love complications. They're the best.
Yeah, but June, I loved, and I could have done a whole lot more with her. But I was like, and I feel like I barely scratched the surface of her relationship with her sister, and all of that. So anyway, I think I could have done a lot more with her. But I knew she needed to be in there because I didn't want to be telling so much information about this camp from like a third party. I wanted it to come from June so that you could feel how very difficult it was for her. And also I thought there was something about, for Daphne and for June, camp is not just like a fun, happy place. It becomes kind of like something that they hide behind. And you couldn't really feel that when you didn't have June in there.
Right. No, I agree. And more June. I would have loved more June. So I hope we do see more of her. We'll come back to that in a minute.
Okay.
So it felt like this was mostly Daphne's journey to me. And I confess, I cast you as her in my brain as I was reading. It's like I was seeing you as Daphne. I can't help it. I do that with virtually every book I read. I put the author and the main character's sort of POV.
I do that too. Yeah.
Did you identify with one character more than the others?
This was an interesting book for me because, I think I always identify with all of my characters, right? Like, I think in some small way, every character has like a tiny piece of me.
Sure.
But I am not any of these women in any part. Like, okay, like I'll give you a good example. So like for Daphne, when she goes to Huff and she says, this isn't going to work, I don't think we can be together, I would have been like, because Lanier doesn't want us together and I'm an explainer. Like I have to tell you all the reasons and all the things, and Daphne doesn't do that, right? She's like, she takes it. Like she takes the blame for whatever it is. Not that I'm like shifting the blame. I just need to give you all the reasons where she's you
want there to be clarity.
Yes.
You want to be understood.
Yes.
Me too.
And so that was a really, like, I'm not kidding you. I read this book like 35 times. And every time I read that scene, I was like, oh God, oh, this is so bad. This is so awful. Because I think it's realistic. It's just not realistic for me.
No.
So that was really hard for me to write. And I really thought, Lanier was an interesting character because she loves her friends so deeply, but she also, she makes some not great decisions in there too. So,
yeah.
I mean, I think I relate the most to Mary Stuart, actually. I know she's not a POV, But I think I tend to be, you know how you like shift roles in different relationships that you have, kind of? So while I think I am like, I think my basic personality, like I'm very type A and I kind of am a leader. Like I like to be the organizer and in charge. But sometimes you're in a relationship where someone else is really much that person. And so you kind of take a back seat and you're more like, so I think sometimes in like friendships, I tend to be more Mary Stuart. Like I'm kind of the peacemaker, or I try to like, I want everyone to be happy and get along. And I think that's kind of her role. And so I probably relate to her most.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll have to go back and read it again and cast you as Mary Stuart. Because I totally saw you as Daphne. But okay, so talk to us some more about Lanier. I have to tell you, there were times I disliked Lanier. Was she suggested by someone you know? What was your inspiration for this character?
So, okay. So the thing that I really, I wanted to put these women in complicated situations. And I thought, you know, the idea that Daphne knew this secret and that Lanier is her person. Like Lanier is
Right.
her mom and her sister and her best friend and her caregiver and her savior. And Lanier is everything for Daphne because Daphne doesn't really have anyone else.
Okay. But I don't want to interrupt you, but that's like why I had a problem with Linear, because Daphne, what she was Daphne's person, and of course this is a fictional character, and you know, but I'm thinking Lanier knows that she's Daphne's person. She knows that she's her everything, and yet she still sort of played fast and loose with her happiness a couple of times, you know, sort of sabotaging her relationship with Huff. And I know that you had to have this conflict, and of course this is a fictional character, and I'm not taking issue with this fictional character like a crazy person or whatever, but this was a complex thing for you to write, and I applaud you for doing it, because every character can't be, you know, perfect, or it wouldn't be very interesting. So you did this so well with Lanier, because you made her understandable and likable, but at the same time she was sort of shifty there.
Yeah. Well, but I think, you know, I think, again, I was trying to be really real with Lanier. I
Yeah.
was like, I want this to be really real. And if you know your best friend and you love her to pieces, but you know she's a wreck. She's a wreck. She can't commit to a relationship. She never stays with a man. She has reasons for that. She's really damaged. But you love her to pieces. But do you want her with your brother? I don't. And that's real. You know what I mean?
It is.
I mean,
I do.
and so I think that was she also saw them in a situation where they really went downhill together. I mean, they really did. They were like a little codependent train wreck. And she lived it and she saw it. And so while the way she goes about it might not be right, she has her reasons. But further, I really wanted this book to have this little element of how we become our parents and how we don't, and how we try not to and how we try to. And the thing that I don't know if you've ever noticed this, like with yourself or with your friends or anyone, but sometimes the thing that like just drove you the craziest about your parents growing up, you're like, oh my God, that's me now. Like I have become that thing. And so I thought like the irony of Lanier being so annoyed at her mother and her little secrets and all her meddling and da-da-da-da and all her behind the scenes blah, blah, blah. And Lanier does the same thing. And so part of her journey as a character was to learn like, this is the thing that annoys me the most about my mom. It is now the person that I have turned into. And it has hurt people that I love, and now I have to move on. But I'm going to say one thing in Lanier's defense, too. I'm going to say one thing in Lanier's defense. Lanier has a bad reaction in a moment of surprise, but never once does she ask Daphne to break up with Huff. Daphne chooses to do that on her own. And I think part of it's Lanier, but part of it is that Daphne is afraid. And she uses Lanier as an excuse. So if you really look at Lanier and what she actually did and what Daphne presumes she is doing, they're not really the same thing. And even when Huff comes in and he's so mad at her and she's like, I didn't mean for her to break up with you. You know, she has a bad reaction in a moment of panic. But
Right.
but I will also say this, and I do think, as I was saying, I do think it's very real. Like when you're in your teens and your 20s, you do not want your siblings dating your friends. You just don't.
You
It's hard.
know, my siblings were so much younger than me, so I didn't ever really have that sort of issue, you know, so I couldn't really think about it, I guess, in that way. But I just identified so much with Daphne. I was just so much on her side.
Yeah.
And I felt a little bit betrayed by Lanier because of that, because I was just so team Daphne. And of course, they're best friends and they're, you know, they love each other and it all worked out beautifully. But anyway, for a while, I was very much just hurt along with Daphne by this whole situation.
Yes.
Which
well,
is, you know.
No, I also think that was something that I really wanted to explore too. Is I've written sisters a lot, and I mean it's funny. I'm saying all these things like you don't like this, and you're like I'm an only child, so like but I've lived this with my friends. I have lived it. I have lived it in my 30s, where you still don't really want your best friend dating your brother. So I've lived it. I've lived it. I've seen it. I've lived it. And so that's fine. That's all well and good. But I think what I really wanted to explore in here too was that friendship that you've had from the time you were a small child and how it's different than a friendship that maybe you have when you're older. Because like, honestly, if Lanier and Daphne had met in their 20s and this had gone down, they would never speak to each other again. Right? But they've known each other since they're 6. And so it's a different kind of relationship. And so, but you're still not sisters. You're not.
Right. But they've been through so much together. They have that shared history, and that's something you can't find. I mean, that's something you don't just get later, that shared history. You either have it or you don't. And so, no, I totally get that. But you did such a great job with these characters.
I'm glad that you felt all these things.
Isn't it great? I mean, seriously, I was emotionally connected to your characters. And I think that's one reason, not that I wasn't emotionally connected to all the rest of them, but this book more, I think I felt like that connection. And I was just like really more emotionally involved in it, maybe. And that I think is probably why I said it's my favorite of yours so far.
But don't you think that in order to love one character like super deeply, you have to hate one just a little bit?
Well, you definitely have to be on her side. And I was definitely on Daphne's side. When they were at odds, I was definitely on Daphne's side. And again, I kept seeing you as Daphne. So maybe that's part of the reason.
You were Team Kristy. Thank you, Susan.
Absolutely. Always Team Kristy. Always. So I love that you gave these 3 main characters, the younger main characters, fun careers. Daphne, of course, is a lawyer. Lanier owns a bookstore. Oh, what a great career. And Mary Stewart's in PR. And at least 2 of these are careers that I once aspired to at some point. Are you living out roads not taken through your characters at all? Did you ever want to be a lawyer or own a bookstore?
Yes. So 100%, I was going to go to law school. That was like my life plan.
Me too.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? And I ended up like, I just wasn't sure. And I thought, okay, am I going to go spend 3 years like doing this thing when I'm not really sure? And so I decided to get a master's, and I was doing this program, and I knew like just with credits I already had and stuff that I could get it done in a year. And I was like, okay, if I do this master's and I take a year, and then I decided to go back to law school, it's not the end of the world, right? It's just a year. And then, you know, by that time, my husband and I got married. We were living in this little Eastern North Carolina town. I had gotten this great job that I really liked in finance, which was so random, but like things just took a different shift. And I still even thought about like maybe going back after that. And I mean, he really was like, what do you really want to do? Like, do you really want to be a lawyer? Like, is that really? And I was like, no, I just like, I want like, I'm trying, you know, when you're trying to find that thing.
Oh, yes.
And he was like, well, what do you really want to do? And I was like, well, I really want to write a book, but like, it's never going to get published. What a stupid idea. Why would someone do that? So here we are. And of course, I want to own a bookstore. Like, who doesn't want to own a bookstore?
If you love books, you want to own a bookstore.
And you have this like romanticized version of like all the glory of it and none of the
Hmm.
actual work. And then I think you and I both know if you're an author, you kind of are in PR.
Oh yeah, that definitely is part of the job.
Yeah. So just worked.
Uh, but it's, I think those were fun careers you gave these women, and it was nice to see that they all had careers that they enjoyed, and they had other problems, but they were all doing something that they loved, and that was nice. I enjoyed that.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm sure I've asked you this before, but tell us about Cape Carolina. You've used the setting in other books, but it's fictional, right?
Yes. And I keep coming back to it because it's like, I feel like Peachtree Bluff is such a character in that series
Hmm.
that it doesn't feel like a setting that I can reuse without it specifically being a Peachtree Bluff book. And
Hmm.
so Cape Carolina is sort of this like, it's a little bit Morehead City, it's a little bit Atlantic Beach. There's like maybe a little dab of Beaufort thrown in there. It's kind of like where I live, but it's like all mushed together.
Hmm.
And so I like using that setting because it feels coastal, it feels North Carolina, but it's not specific. And it's funny too because people email me all the like I got an email from someone yesterday and she was like, "Oh, is Cape Carolina Corolla? And is the house that you used in Under the Southern Sky?" Now I don't remember what she said, like some house. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, no, but I love that you thought that." Like I think it's one of those settings where people can it's like generic enough that it's like whatever beach town you love can kind of be Cape Carolina. So,
Right.
yeah, so I keep coming back to it because it's like, and I like just a little mention of another character that's in that town or something like that. So,
Hmm.
although I will tell you in my next book, I wrote about real Beaufort for the first time.
Really?
Yes.
So tell us about that. So that's a few questions ahead, but that's a
Okay.
nice segue. Tell
Oh,
us
okay.
about that.
All right. I don't want to get you off track. I mean, I can tell you later. Okay. Okay. Well, so my next book is called Last Summer on Sunset Lane. And it is about a young woman, like she's like 30, I think, who discovers she knows that her grandparents died, like before she was born, a long time before she was born. Like to the point where she knows they existed, obviously, and she's heard like little snippets about like this accident they were in, but she really doesn't know anything about them because her mom just doesn't talk about them. She doesn't like to. It's just a hard thing for her to confront. And so she finds out that her mom and her uncle have never sold their childhood home, which she thinks is bananas. So they decide they're finally ready. It's been almost 50 years. They are going to sell this house in Beaufort that they grew up in, that they have literally not walked in since 1976, the night their parents died.
Wow.
And so she's like, okay, I'm going to go to Beaufort. I'm going to clean this house out and, I'm going to take care of this problem for you. There's a lot that goes into that. There are a lot of reasons why she decides to do this, but I won't spoil it for you. So she goes back to Beaufort, and of course, because it's Beaufort, she meets all of these people immediately because if you are coming back to the house that no one's been in 50 years, everyone's going to be in your business. I mean, that is just like, duh, like obviously, and you're right downtown, so everyone's going to see you. There's nowhere to hide. So all of the ladies in town kind of take her in as their like pet project and get her involved in all these town happenings, and they all sort of knew her grandmother. And so she starts hearing these stories about her grandparents while she's cleaning out this house, and she really starts to kind of piece together who they were. And she starts to realize that the story that she's been told about them her whole life might not be true, which also makes her realize that a lot of the things about her mom and her uncle that she thought were so strange maybe aren't as strange as they seem. And so, at the same time, we are seeing Rebecca St. James, who is the grandmother, and we're watching her story unfold in Beaufort from 1935 until 1976 on that fateful night that we learn about in the story. So, it was really fun to get to write about not only like right now Beaufort, but also historical Beaufort, and to get to go back and kind of fortunately for me, well, actually not, this was really funny. So they've been working on this digitization project for North Carolina newspapers. So all of the papers from like 1935 until like 1969 have been digitized. but nothing in the 70s. So I was doing all my like really old research. I could find all those papers online, but then the ones in the 70s, I was like in the library, on the microfilm machine, doing the research. So it was fun. Got to learn a
That
lot about
sounds
myself.
like a lot of fun. So now, when does this one come out? Is this next summer's book?
Well, yeah, it's next summer's book. It's slated right now for April, but it might get moved to the summer. So we'll see.
Well,
I know.
we can't wait. We are already looking forward to it. So switching gears just a bit. So the Peachtree Bluff series, I understand, is in development with NBC. Is this true?
Yes.
Somehow I had not heard that. I don't know
okay.
how I missed that, but when I was getting ready for this conversation, I'm like, did I know that and I just forgot? I don't remember. There's a lot going on in my world right now, so that's
There's a lot
possible,
happening
too.
in your life that does not have to do specifically with my
It,
books, Susan, so I do understand.
it could be that I knew and I forgot, but when I saw it, I went, "Oh, this is wonderful!" So, all right, and you are the co-writer and the co-executive producer. So exciting. So, give us the details that you can, if you can. First of all, of course, who is playing Ansley, Carolyn, Sloan, and Emerson, and what about Jack?
I know, right? I was saying to them the other day that the funniest part to me is there are a lot of like heartthrobby characters in Peachtree Bluff. Like there are a lot of like great male leads in this series.
Mm-hmm.
But the funny thing to me is even like the youngest people who read Peachtree Bluff are like, and who's going to play Jack? Like everyone loves Jack. It's like
Yeah.
no one, of course we get like Coffee Kyle or whatever, but the very most, just like, who's going to be Jack? We just love Jack. I love Jack too. Obviously. But, okay, so I don't know, everything's a little weird right now because of all of the strikes and everything.
Yeah.
And so there's just nothing happening. And to be totally honest, I don't know if we'll make it through all of this just because the way that television runs and cycles and things like that. I just don't know because there's just not a lot happening right now. But I did get to co-write the pilot, which was really fun. It was really cool to see how like a team takes something like these books and then sort of translates it to TV. I really wrote. I was not like a figurehead in the room. Like I really wrote this with like another person.
That's awesome.
So that was really fun. And they, were super interested in the second episode. So hopefully, when all of this dies down, like maybe we'll still get to do it. But the reality is maybe not. And I just don't know.
I choose to think positively. Yeah. I'm absolutely convinced we're going to see them on the screen. Yeah. I cannot wait to see who is going to play Jack. I'm absolutely excited about this. It's going to happen. I've got a good feeling about it.
Well, I hope so. Well, thank you. Well, we have definitely dreamcast them, but
so who do you dreamcast?
I can't remember even who we dreamcast for Jack. Isn't that funny? Because we had so many different people in different decks, but
yeah. Okay. All right. So we know what you're working on now. We know what's coming out next. Is there anything else that's on the horizon that we need to know about?
Well, I am working on something right now that I really can't tell anything about because I haven't sold it or anything, but I love it. I'm so excited. And it's something that like I didn't start that long ago, and I am 33,143 words in. So it's coming together, which is really exciting. Yeah. It is 100% not what I was going to write. I had not sold it yet, but my agent was like, how you're always talking about what you're working on next and what it's going to be. And I was like, I have these two ideas. One's a standalone, one's a series. And just as like time was going on, the series just really caught me. And I knew everything about it. I knew all the characters. I knew what was going to happen. I was like, I'm doing it. It's a series. It's going to be next. And I gave myself deadlines. Do you give yourself deadlines?
I try to, but life just kind of happens lately. So yeah, anyway.
But like vaguely, like I try to.
Yeah.
So it was this like Monday morning where I woke up and I was like, okay, today's the day that I'm going to start writing my new series. And I was driving in the car and I had just dropped Will off at camp, and all of a sudden I just got this idea. Like it just like hit me like a light bulb, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then I was like, maybe this is crazy. I don't know. And so I was having lunch with a bunch of my friends, like my mom friends. And I was like, y'all, I have this idea. Like, is this good or is this crazy? And they were all like, oh my gosh. And then it was something that like throughout the course of the day, we were already like quoting it. Like we were like already like set. And so I was like, okay, all right, well maybe this is good. So, but you know, you don't know. So I was doing so for some people probably know and some people probably don't know, I have a group with Mary Kay Andrews and Kristen Harmel and Patty Callahan Henry called Friends in Fiction, and we do a weekly web show together, and then we have a lot of meetings and stuff. So we're on the meeting, and I'm like, I know we have to meet, but I was like, y'all, I have this idea, like, what do you think? And I said like one line about it, and they were like, oh my gosh, you have to write that book next. And I was like, okay. So I got up the next day and I started writing it. And I talked to my agent a few days ago. She's like, how's the series coming? I was like, oh, I'm totally not writing that. I'm writing something completely different that I've never even told you about. And she was like, okay, of course you are, because why wouldn't you be? So, but sometimes that happens, you know, and I always think that's exciting when you like just get this idea, like it's like in the zeitgeist, and like if you don't take it, someone else is going to. So
if you anything you have that energy to write, I think is fabulous. That's what you need to be writing. If you feel that much energy about it, if you're that excited about it, then the reader will be too. So I can't wait to see what that is.
We'll see. I know, I wish I could tell you, but anyway, I can't. I mean,
no, I get it.
I'll tell you, but
okay. All right. Oh gosh, this has been so much fun. I have so enjoyed having you, and I know everybody's going to just love listening to all of this. And please don't take anything I said about Lanier to heart. I love all your characters.
No, she was supposed to be like not. I mean, you're if you don't have some feelings about Lanier, then like you're not reading the right book. You got to have some feelings about her behavior. That is all part of it, because you know that to me was the linchpin of this entire book. Right. Is of course Daphne has to tell Lanier about her fiance, right? Even if she's going to get disbarred, until you find out that Lanier is the one that kept Daphne away from the love of her life. And then you've got a real conflict. And so if you love Lanier and you think Lanier is a goddess, then you're not going to feel that, and the whole story falls apart. So we can't, I mean, I hope that readers eventually come to understand her. But I think you definitely can't love her at all times. The story doesn't work if you love her at all times.
Right. That's true. And so, I love Daphne. I'm Team Daphne.
Team Daphne. We'll have shirts made.
Excellent idea. Excellent idea.
But are you Team Huff or are you Team Rich?
Oh.
Not that they're like at odds, just like who's your favorite?
I think I would have to say Team Huff, because I could never live at camp. I'm just not that girl, you know. And Rich, I think he's always going to be living at camp.
Totally.
And I could not be that girl. I'm just a little too high maintenance for that.
Yeah. No, and I loved Huff. Huff was my like love in this book. But my editor is Rich McNabb all the way. He's my favorite like leading man you've ever written.
Wow. Well, I did like him. You can't say anything bad about him. I mean, he's a great guy. Yeah. Certainly a stand-up guy, you know. Yeah. I mean, he definitely was there for Lanier, took good care of her, and all. So definitely a stand-up guy. No, I liked both of them. I can't wait to see who plays them in the movie, because I bet there'll be one.
That would be so great. Let's hope. Fingers crossed.
This has been so much fun. Thank you so much for doing this, and we can't wait to see what comes out next.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me so much, and thank you, everybody. You guys are so supportive of me, and I'm so grateful for all of you. So thank you.
Bye, everybody. Bye, Kristy.